They won't decompose.
There'll be, yeah, not in 3 weeks. There's not much decomposition that takes place without heat. That's right. A anaerobic decomposition process takes a year or two. And it stinks, and it invites bugs, diseases, rodents. It does not kill the weed seeds. And so somebody with a compost pile in their backyard has proliferated the diseases that they had in their garden, proliferated the weed seeds, invited bugs and rodents, and they've got a big mess on their hands. Whereas those rare people who know enough to do it by aerobic composting processes at least get something that's as good as it was at the beginning. Unless they've got rain running through their compost pile, which 90% of them do, you see. And so then they're going to be losing some nutrition through leaching, aren't they? Why am I telling you this? Because so many people don't understand. They think that natural is the only way to go, and compost is the epitome of natural. But unless you really know how to do it properly, you're not solving the problem, you are increasing the problems. Because everything that was a problem previously in the garden is there and magnified and multiplied in that anaerobically composted pile of stuff you're putting in your garden. So how do I get rid of compost? If it is bug-free, weed-free, disease-free, I will immediately till it into the soil and let it compost naturally underground. Otherwise, I remove it from the garden. Okay. So, these are the elements that the plants need, and they need them in specific amounts, specific percentages, and over the course of tens of thousands of experimentation, field and lab experiments, Jacob Mittleider knows what is needed for all vegetable plants, and that is what we give them.
Remind me to put up that blind in the window.
It's gotten in our way, huh? Now that was an aside and wasn't necessarily given into exact perfect time, but I hope you can appreciate, folks, the importance of what I just told you. That is very important information.
What I feel like I see in my garden is that the Mittleider food is just the right amount, that it's not too much salt, so it's not ever toxic to my plants, but it always overcomes that limiting factor. They all each get enough of every nutritional thing that they need, that they are not held back from growing by limited factors of nutrition.
Yeah. Jacob would say a plant cannot grow beyond its most limiting factor. And this is what he was always striving for, was to get that perfect balance. So the plant always had just the right amount, never too much. It's so important because if you put too much copper, for example, what is copper used for? It's a root killer. You get too much of it, it can be bad, can't it?
Poisonous to people, too.
It can be poisonous to people, yeah. Many things in this world are poisonous to people. You know, table salt is a bad thing. As a matter of fact, I even heard that H2O can kill people. I saw in the newspaper this morning where H2O killed a guy. Literally, he drowned in it.
Well, he drank 2 gallons of water and he drank 2 gallons of Gatorade. So
yeah.
it wasn't just the water.
Well, the one I was thinking was actually a drowning, but...
Oh, that's I caught it.
Okay. All right. So this is critical, and we will talk more about it, and you will actually participate in the creation of the perfect fertilizer. You won't do it in quite as big a batch as this lady did, but these farmers saw gardens like they had never dreamed of before. This is what the pre-plant mix consists of. Very simple. It's either lime or gypsum, depending on the rainfall in your area. If you've got more than 20 inches of rain, you use lime. If you got less than 18 inches of rain, you use gypsum. Why? Does everyone know about pH? Anyone not understand pH? Percentage hydrogen. There's a scale of from 1 to 14. It's a logarithmic scale, so that 2 is 10 times higher than 1. 7 is 10 times higher than 6. The middle is 7. And between 6 and 7 is the ideal range of acidity versus alkalinity for your soil. And really what it is the amount of hydrogen that is attached to the soil particles that has displaced the nutrients. So leaching washes out nutrients, we've talked about that. And the more rain, the more leaching, the less nutrients, means that it drives down that pH, means there's more hydrogen attached to the soil and less nutrition, and so the soil becomes acidic. Farmers call lime a soil sweetener because lime is a nutrient, isn't it? And it attaches to the soil particles and raises soil pH. Of course, it also feeds plants. And that's the primary purpose of it in the first place. But a lot of times farmers would only use it because it was sweetening their soil. But the idea is, of course, to keep that pH in the range of 6.5 to 7 so that plants, and why? Because for some reason plants are able to absorb those nutrients best, easiest, in that narrow pH range. So when people talk to you about, you got to have your soil tested for pH, and believe me, this is a big deal. Lots of people swear by that. You got to have your soil tested. I say, find out how much rainfall you get per year. If you got more than 20 inches per year, your soil is going to be acidic, and you use lime. If you get less than 18 inches a year, your soil is going to be alkaline, and you use gypsum. Between 18 and 20, use either one. And that's the purpose of knowing the soil pH. That's all you got to do. And then just use either gypsum or lime. Does everyone understand that? So critical. Richard's over there in the desert, and I can bet that he's got alkaline soil. And so he would love to find some gypsum. Why gypsum instead of lime? Very simple. Lime has calcium in it, and the calcium raises pH. Gypsum has calcium in it, which would raise the pH, but it also has sulfur. And sulfur, as it turns out, lowers soil pH. Gypsum has almost the same amount of sulfur as it has lime, and so gypsum is pH neutral. It will not raise your soil pH. So if you got high pH already, your plants have got to have calcium. Put down gypsum. It won't make your pH problem worse. You'll be able to grow, and your plants will get the calcium they need. Simple as that. So that's all you need to know about pH. And that's what this is all about, because this is what Jacob calls the foundation of a good feeding program. Your body's calcium is very important to your body, isn't it? Bone structure, teeth, plants. Calcium is essential to plant structure, yes.
So with the gypsum, you're not really trying to change the pH, you're just making calcium available.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes, you're not actively trying to change the pH with gypsum. If you've got pH of 8, you may very well need to add what? To lower pH. What did I just tell you lowers pH?
Gypsum.
Lime raises pH. Gypsum is pH neutral. Sulfur lowers pH. See how simple it is?
This pH is the inverse of acidity.
pH is a measure of acidity, alkalinity. Yeah.
So high pH.
It's the scale.
is not
High pH,
acidity, though.
No, that's correct.
So it's the inverse.
Yeah, yeah. Low pH means very acid. Yeah. High pH is alkaline. Yeah. So, like I say, it's simple if you understand the law that goes behind it. And so, yes, if you got extremely high pH, you may want to put some sulfur in. Sulfur is a plant nutrient. That was one of those secondary nutrients, wasn't it? If you got high pH, put some sulfur in. Measure it. Look in the book. Jacob will tell you how much. And then you won't have any risk of hurting your plants. But that's the foundation of a good feeding program right there. Some Epsom salt, some boron, and some gypsum or lime. Understand this. Plants receive this as water-soluble minerals through their roots. So, no guesswork, nothing is left to chance. They get exactly what they need. And of course, a continuous supply is best. Now, when does somebody use manure if they're growing? They use it before they plant. I mean, it's the only practical time to do it. And by law, a commercial grower who's expecting to be certified organic must apply his manure 120 days before harvest if the edible part of the plant touches the ground. If the edible part of the plant does not touch the ground, he has to apply the manure 90 days before harvest. Why? What's the purpose?
Breakdown.
Disease. Potential for disease. You see, it has got to have broken down. It's got to have a long time for any disease organisms that might have been in that to have gone away. One feeding? How many of you would like to give your kids one meal and say, see you when you're in high school? It'd be great, yeah? Just doesn't work that way, does it? This system is actually sometimes called the best of organic. Why do you suppose? The best of organic?
It's not haphazard.
Okay, let's talk about what did I do? I just messed it up, didn't I? Let me just answer that question first, Alex. You see, a commercial organic grower will generally apply an organic product or products to his garden. And then he will look at it and he will discover deficiency symptoms. Plants are not growing just right, or there's this or that problem. He must take a soil test, determine what is lacking, then he will apply these same minerals that we apply. Based on a soil test, based on a requirement and the need of the plants. Now, that is expensive, takes time. The entire crop has suffered for weeks, at least, while they've gone through that process, and then he's putting something in the plant. Well, what if something was marginally needed and maybe not showing up as a requirement, and then he puts some of this stuff, and a week or two later, now it needs a little more magnesium because it's growing faster and it needed that magnesium, but it didn't show up at first. It's a constant guessing game, don't you see? And that's what they have to do by law. And so they use the same minerals that we use. You can look in the USDA under organic requirements and you'll see these exact same minerals that we use. Jacob says we only use a tiny amount. I talked about putting a couple of 100 pounds of manure in my garden. A couple of 100 pounds in a 30-foot bed, about that deep, till it in. How much chemical salt do I have in that 200 pounds of manure? What's the percentage of nitrogen in manure or compost? Anyone come a guess? 3%. Generally, nitrogen is about 1%, potash maybe 1%, phosphate 0.5%, and the minors are somewhere smaller than that. So perhaps manure might have 3 to 6% salt. They'll generally say about 5% salt. So if you got 200 pounds, how much salt are you putting in a 30-foot bed? 10 pounds. Yeah, all at once. Is that quite a bit of salt? How much does the Mittleider system of growing put in a 30-foot bed at one time? 7 ounces. 7 ounces. You see, those guys back there at Thanksgiving Point, they didn't know what they were talking about. They were way out to lunch, saying that Jacob was putting too much chemicals in the soil. They were the ones with their manure and their compost that were putting 10 pounds at one time. And that was way too much. And so they were burning the little seedlings when they were first coming up. And a month or two later, when the plant is big and robust and needing a lot of nutrition, it's worn out. There's nothing left of that manure because it's all been used up or leached out. And so now the plants are hungry, and in July, their tomatoes are done. And that's what they say. I went to a big greenhouse grower in Turkey. Gorgeous tomatoes about this high, 1st of July, and they had tomatoes on them. And I came back the 30th of July before I left the country, and the tomatoes were all being torn out. It doesn't freeze in Turkey till November. The best half of their growing season was in front of them. And they tore out the whole crop. Why? They were done. There was no food. And they didn't know to feed their crops a balanced nutrient mix. It cost them at least half their crop. At least half the crop. And these were guys that had thousands of dollars invested in this thing, you see. So that is what this is all about. The best of organic, because we don't waste the time or the money doing it the wrong way and then trying to catch up by fixing the problem by putting some of this and some of that in there. We put tiny amounts of a balanced mix so that the plants right from the get-go have just exactly what they need and no more. And so in an entire growing season, I mean, if we fed tomatoes 20 times, we would have less than 10 pounds of salt in that bed in an entire growing season, you see. That's what the manure grower puts in right at the beginning. Here's the weekly feed. You guys will participate in this. We recommend 16, 16, 16, plus a little package of micronutrients, the minors, as they say, or the trace elements, and then some Epsom salt. I'm not sure the picture is good enough to show that real well, but 4 pounds, a 10-ounce packet, and 25 pounds of 16, 16, 16. And that's the weekly feed. And then you use a half an ounce per foot. And that foot is feeding 2 rows of plants. And you know, one of the genius things about this whole system is it doesn't matter what kind of plant, how big the plant is, how many plants there are. If you've got a foot of row with 2 rows of carrots and they're planted an inch apart, that means you got 24, 25 carrots in 1 foot. And you're feeding 25 carrots a half an ounce. You got 1 tomato plant, half an ounce. 4 heads of lettuce, half an ounce. He got it all figured out so that it's the same amount per lineal foot of grow bed, no matter what you're feeding. Now you won't feed lettuce as many times as you will tomatoes, because they're not growing as long, because you stop 3 weeks before harvest, you see. He has systematized the process and simplified it to where anyone can do it, and they're guaranteed success with no guesswork and no failure. Amazing. Okay. Back to our question about natural versus synthetic. I just want to kind of introduce you to a little thought that maybe most of you have not really thought about. The most important single nutrient is nitrogen. You know, it's 75, 76% of the atmosphere all around us is nitrogen. And yet plants, they can't get it. You know, their leaves are sitting there and the atmosphere's all around them. They get no nitrogen through their leaves, even though it's 76% of the air. How do they have to get it? Got to get it through the roots, don't they? How does it come? If there's 76% of it in the air, how does it ever get down to the plants? Lightning. That thing that God has given us is a real blessing. I mean, it might kill one of us once in a while, but It's an amazing blessing because one big old lightning will fix hundreds and thousands of tons of nitrogen, changes it from N to NO2, and then it comes down with the rain, and it becomes available to the plants. That's how most of the nitrogen gets to the plants worldwide, is through lightning. Well, before 100 or so years ago, commercial growers were going to a place called Chile, South America, and they were getting ammonium nitrate, what was it called? Sodium nitrate, out of mines in Chile, and they were having it shipped all the way to the United States from Chile. Can you imagine 100 years ago how much that cost? It was extremely expensive, and so, it wasn't used a whole lot until two German PhDs, Haber and Bosch, discovered how to make lightning. And basically they did. They replicated the effects of lightning to where they were able to fix nitrogen by this lightning in a bottle, if you will. And today, look what's happened. Between 30 and 60% of the world's nitrogen needs, 500 million tons of nitrogen. I mean, how great is that? 1% of the Earth's energy has sustained 40% of the Earth's population. Was that a natural process or a synthetic process? How natural is lightning?
Very natural.
Now, how many of the organic enthusiasts are scared of anhydrous ammonia? And that's exactly what is made from the Haber-Bosch process, is anhydrous ammonia. It's the most pure. I think it's like 78% nitrogen or something. It's a really high percentage. And then, of course, from that, they will take it down to 34%, which is the best for the garden. That's ammonium nitrate. But you can make bombs and destroy the federal building and so forth. And so now the government's scared of it. Now you can't get it. And so now they turned it into something not nearly as good, which is urea. And that's 46% nitrogen. But it's not in the form that plants can use. And it has to go through 2 or 3 different chemical processes before plants can use it. And so much of it volatilizes and goes back into the air before plants get it. The third normal, natural, or common form of nitrogen we get is ammonium sulfate. And that's 2100. If you're in a high alkaline desert environment, 2100 is pretty good because it has what with it? Sulfur. It'll lower soil pH. If you're in an acidic environment, probably better use urea because you don't really want a lot more sulfur to lower your pH more. Guess what? You folks just learned more than 99% of the farmers and growers. I don't care where you live. I'll bet you there's not 1 in 100 that understands what you just learned. If you understand the importance of what I just said, you can become an expert in feeding your plants. Because it's not difficult if you know what's going on behind it, what makes it work and why. Question?
If you're utilizing rain catchment, does that increase?
Rain catchment?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Does that increase the amount of nitrogen then that they would normally get if they were getting free-falling rain?
Can't answer that. I don't think that it is enough of a change to affect any of your feeding regimen. I've never seen any, David uses rain catchment, or did in Houston, and he still used the exact same feeding regimen and had great plants. So I'm not even sure the question, but yeah, David?
My thought was that it volatilized before I really get it into the, because I have 1,600 gallons of holding tanks.
Yeah.
And the nitrogen volatile or what? Is that thing?
Easy for you to say.
Yeah. Before I actually got it into the garden.
Yeah.
I don't think it made
Yeah.
any difference at all.
And this brings up a really good important point, and that is that nitrogen is volatile. It goes through a cycle. Starts in the air, comes down, and goes back to the air. And so standing water for any length of time, the nitrogen is going to volatilize or go back out of it and up into the air. So your catchment systems generally are going to hold the water for weeks and maybe even months. So probably they won't have much nitrogen in them by the time they're fed to the plants. The beauty of it with rain is that it comes down enriched with nitrogen, boom, instantly on the plants. So did that answer your question? Okay. So, sixth, what I call the law of plant growth, which isn't really a law of plant growth at all, but believe me, those 4 elements of competition are so important. You'll see evidences of some of those out in this garden, where we haven't done as good a job as we should have, and we suffer for it. So, we won't have time to really spend a lot of time on that this week, but what I want to do now is give you folks a few minutes of introduction to the man I consider to be the best gardener in the world. Now, obviously his experience is limited. He has not grown using huge equipment on huge acreage. He probably wouldn't know exactly how to do leaf analysis, but practical gardening, family garden sizes, all over the world, there's nobody that comes close to his experience. 10 books, 9 manuals, scientifically balanced natural fertilizer formula, non-toxic. I have had people compare this with some of the most popular complete fertilizers in the country. I don't want to name names because this is being videoed. But a woman living near Cornell University did a big test and comparison, and she is today an avid proponent of the Mittleider fertilizer system because she thinks it's the best there is after her testing. Talk a little bit about him. He started out as a farm boy in Idaho. Hated farming. Vowed he wouldn't be a farmer. Took baking. And he learned some important lessons as a baker. He learned to measure, to record everything he did, to do everything accurately, to make no changes unless those were proven to be better. You know, if you don't follow a recipe, you're not going to get the same product time after time, are you? And he learned that lesson very well and became a very good baker. And when he was 80 years old, I had him bake things for me, and he was a good baker still. But that was one of the things that allowed him to become very wealthy because of his 11 plant patents. You see, he would do experiments on plants, he would cross-pollinate them, and over and over and over and over again, hundreds of thousands of times, until he produced hybrids that were commercially wonderful, viable, very desirable plants. 11 times he got plant patents that way. Now, he was 43 years old, and he was shipping his plants almost all over the United States, from Southern California as far away as Louisiana, which entailed, of course, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas. Making a lot of money, but he was killing himself. And when the doctors took out half his stomach and told him he didn't have long to live, he had a conversation with his God and promised that he'd do something better with his life if God would give him additional time to do some good. He sold his business. He went to the Loma Linda University. I told you he was an Adventist. That's an Adventist college. And he said, I don't believe there's any good reason why people are starving around the world. The God I worship wouldn't make an earth that couldn't feed its people. And they said, yeah, sure. And he proceeded to take his own money and went for 6 months, visited 24 countries around the world. And he came back. He said, it's true. They've got light, they've got land, they've got water, and they waste all three. And everywhere he went, he saw people starving and dying from malnutrition. And there were doctors for their bodies, but there were no doctors for their plants. Nobody was taking care of their nutritional needs by teaching them how to grow properly. And he determined that he was going to do that so that they could eat better, thereby becoming healthier. And the Loma Linda folks said, "You ready to go? We got a place for you." Scariest place in the world. These people were cannibals. A place called Papua New Guinea. And until the Australian military came in and stopped them at a point of a gun, they were constantly warring with each other. 400 different languages, all these different villages, and the winners would eat the losers. And as many as 90% of some of those villages were dying of a horrible disease called the Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. Anyone know that by a different name? Mad cow. Yeah. Why is it called mad cow disease? Because a bunch of cows have gotten that disease. And it has actually transferred from those cows to humans. As a matter of fact, a few years ago in Great Britain, an outbreak of that was so bad, and it was transferring to humans, and the whole world quarantined Great Britain beef and other meat. Now it's against the law for animals to be cannibals. That's what caused it. We were making cannibals out of our animals by feeding this generation of cows with the ground up remains of the previous generation of cows. That's what we were doing. And that's causing that. Well, Jacob learned early on the dangers of using animal byproducts in any of his gardens, and he would not ever use animal byproducts in his gardens. See, he learned that lesson big time. Well, here he goes to this country, never freezes, gorgeous place, it should be a paradise. And they're starving. This is what their crops looked like. I mean, they couldn't grow anything between the diseases and the deficiencies and the bugs. They were literally starving. The Adventist school and hospital were about to be closed because they couldn't even feed the staff, let alone the students. Richard?
What is that?
Cabbage. Yeah, actually it's mostly weeds, but that's what he did. In a matter of weeks, that's what that place looked like. The people's main crop, food crop, was sweet potatoes. And according to the law that they'd established down there, the students were supposed to have 5 pounds of sweet potatoes per day. I mean, that's a lot of sweet potatoes. They had to have that much because there wasn't much nutrition in the sweet potatoes. The natives were growing sweet potatoes 1.5 tons per acre. And at 7,300 elevation at the hospital, it took them 22 months to grow 1.5 tons per acre. Before and after. By the way, those guys